once NBC passes on a fourth season, that kind of dismantles a lot of our international funding. So a lot of international channels need an American broadcaster to say, like, this is the American TV show on this network, and that gives them a platform to which they can sell the show. Without that, we lose our Sony component, which is also our AXN channels, and so we've lost a lot of our channels all over the world. So that's one of the big hurdles.
Yeah, I don't remember spending so much time without my clothes on, but no, you get 6 episodes of that story arc, which really has only been explored in 2 movies for probably 90 minutes at a time. So it's a real chance to go to that book, which is incredibly detailed, and look at the backstory of where Francis Dolarhyde came from and how he's emerged as this strange, this man that's complicated and dark and at the same time innocent and romantic. And so hopefully we're going to open that story up.
Yes, if it had to, it could. It would be satisfying in that respect. It could also serve as a good jumping-off point for another season.
The idea for season 4 is a reinvention of the Hannibal Will Graham dynamic in a huge way. So there is an opportunity to reinvent the show as well as the format in which we tell the show.
I think that, I mean, partially because we were totally freed from that, weekly crime of the week, whatever you want to call it, that more procedural element, and Bryan was able to write in a much more free-form kind of way, and as a result was able to explore that kind of looping, circular nature of grief and trauma, such that it took me a while after reading the first 2-3 scripts to really, understand what I at least understood him to be doing, and with the nature of time, and so it did take me a while to kind of dig down into what I understood to be rattling around in Will's head. It was different, really provocative stuff. I thought meditations on religion and belief and so on. But it wasn't a different guy exactly. I mean, clearly Will's always had that capacity to create a reality around him or be the victim of an imagined reality, just taken to a greater extreme. In some ways, I suppose, playing characters and in this world that could be so kind of floating, like occasionally being tethered down, was not such a bad thing. That said, like I remember, you approaching that first season and having really worked to figure out who this guy was and what was underlying all of his kind of angst and so on. There were only so many ways I could be emotionally affected by these crimes. Week in, week out, try, because Bryan's writing is always emotional. There's always, if you dig down, you can find it. But any procedural, certain elements that are repeated,
And clinical.
And clinical, yeah. And so trying to find the emotional response of the character to that felt like it could have become like a bit forced had we had to continue in that way.
And it was fun for us in the writer's room to not have that as a crutch for the storytelling, because so often when we were breaking those stories, it was like, okay, now a body has to drop, and what's the metaphor of the death tableau? And it was a spine to a lot of the storytelling, and when we jerked that spine out of the body, like the Predator, it was it kind of left us with this slightly amorphous yet emotionally sound psychological tale that didn't have that buttressing, and so it was fun for me as somebody who loves the pretension in Thomas Harris's writing, and it's so beautiful and purple and articulate that I wanted this season to smack of Thomas Harris in a way that we hadn't in the first 2 seasons. Part of it was, I felt like if we were to sustain the Italian chapter for an entire season, there would be episodes that might tread a little water. And, we had episodes still that treaded some water and that got into some psychological stuff. But it was also an awareness of the scythe over our heads, and NBC has been so fantastic and supportive of us in allowing us to tell a story that no other network would allow us to do. And part of that gentleman's agreement with Jen Sulky, who's the president of entertainment, was, I will let you do the show that you want to do, and I can protect the show as long as we're above a 0.5. And once we went below a 0.5 rating, I knew Jen wouldn't be able to protect us from the schedulers at NBC who are like, we can't sell this at upfronts because nobody's going to buy advertising at top dollar rates for a 0.5 rating. So I was aware that this was going to be our last season in many ways, so I kind of wanted to get as much in there, and I thought if we don't do Red Dragon now, we might not be able to. It was really about owing Caroline more than what we had done with her character in the second season. She became the girlfriend in many ways, and so she was triangulated against Will and Hannibal in a way that she was the girl, for lack of a better word. And the first thing I said to the writers when we sat down for season 3 is that it is our mission to make Alana the most interesting character on the show, to go through the biggest transformation, because I felt like we owed it to Caroline, and I wanted to see how she was broken and how she reformed and how she found her strength again, and I knew Caroline would knock it out of the park. So I was inspired by her as an actress to give her more.
I think it's really down to Thomas Harris writing. He really explores the childhood, the damaged child that he created in Francis Dolarhyde, and it sort of doesn't track in a linear way. So you delve back into his past so you learn about his crimes first, and then you retrace where they came from. I usually do that kind of work myself anyway, but I didn't need to do any of it. The biography was there, and all I needed to do was really kind of make the connection between the original source material and what Bryan and the writers were putting together. But in terms of how deep it was, I mean, it was obviously all just in the imagination. There was no real practical way of accessing it. And staying with the humour of the cast and crew that work on it, because if you don't, then it's a terribly dark and depressing place to visit. But it was a very buoyant shoot, really.
We were in the editing room with the editors, and there were several scenes where both the editor and I, who's sitting up in front of me, and I'm behind, and we were both surreptitiously like wiping a tear out of the corner of our eyes, because it's heartbreaking. You feel so badly for this man who's struggling against his insanity to find love, and it's that thing that makes him so intimately relatable to the audience. And you're looking at these scenes between Regina Wesley and Richard. Both of them are wonderful and have wonderful chemistry, and you're just like, so he killed some families, just like get on with the love. So it's really a great performance. I can't wait for you to see it.
We were actually just talking about this coming out of our panel and being in front of so many that they have stayed with the show from the first season, first episode. And what they immediately started to identify with were both characters, Bill Graham or Hannibal Lecter. And they shipped those roles, is that what you say? And so they became anagrams. And they just became a terrific, huge collective. And it grew, and they're smart. We're talking about this as well. As our audience is, I would say, a more mature, smarter audience that appreciates the subtleties, appreciates the just the scale of which things are done, from the music, from the cinematography, from the cast, the sets, the writing. So it's given them a lot to play on, and we appreciate that. That's what's supported us.
And I think in an interesting way, since the show is fan fiction, I'm a huge Thomas Harris fan, and it's not a literal adaptation, even though so much of the literature does make it into the show. It is, I think, relatable to that community who are also fan fiction writers and storytellers. So I I respect when they twist it around in really interesting ways and have very strange illustrations of Maz and Hugh often chewing each other's penises off. And it's like, well, God bless them.
Like, often.
It happens.
An enormous amount to me, on every level. It's been challenging in the work and unique in that respect. Unique as what has felt like an incredible collaboration because of Bryan's generosity in that respect. Collaboration with Maz, who I love, who's a wonderful actor and an incredible partner in that respect, and just but going way beyond that, way beyond all of us here, it's been like a really kind of one of a kind. Like, this is very bittersweet being here. You know, I don't like, we don't know what the future of the show is, if there is a future for the show, but it's a part celebration and it's part a kind of something else.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't expect to have an experience of this nature for a long time, if ever again. And that's no bad thing. It's just because it's been so profound.
One of the things that was very satisfying for me in telling the story as someone who is interpreting another writer's work is that it wasn't mine, so I didn't have the arrogance of saying, like, no, this is the right way. I mean, I did for a lot of things, but it also left room to collaborate with Hugh and Maz and Richard on the Red Dragon in ways that they saved my ass when I was staring at a script going like where, like, what is missing from this? And Hugh would call and we would have a 2-hour conversation about what was missing, and he would help me figure it out. I think coming into, it was either the first season or the second season, Convention Hall, and seeing how many young women were in the audience, and that delighted me to no end, to have a relationship with a fan community that was young people who were very intelligent, very articulate, very open to new and weird things, and being able to champion them as individuals as they have championed the show. That was a pretty great moment.
I don't know, but I think that Hannibal is always the smartest guy in the room, just to some extent. Like, he can slip up by virtue of his vanity or whatever, but,
or his affection for Will.
Or his affection for Will. Like, he eventually, that is a genuine source of maybe vulnerability, but he's always kind of one step ahead. I mean, he's not infallible, but he's the next best thing.
Whoever managed to create that origami heart, like some kind of biological Rubik's Cube, that person is the smartest person.
I've always said Bedelia is the smartest character on the show. And part of that is because I love Gillian Anderson and grew up with Scully and wanted to write for her. Wait till you see Will and Bedelia in the second half of the season, and they're kind of bitchy. They're kind of bitchy and jealous of each other. It's great.
To accomplish a huge amount, I had to explain why Will had been on this kind of looping path to get back to Hannibal, when in some sense I felt like he probably could have found him in a day. That first half of the show, just for myself, it felt like a kind of quest of sorts, and it needed to give a sense of what the purpose of that quest had been, even if he didn't know the purpose when he set off, you know.
And that was another great example of how fantastic Hugh is to collaborate with. There's a lot of dialogue in that scene where he was saying, I feel like Will would be saying that he feels responsible for every crime that Hannibal has committed, every crime that he will commit, because he's gotten so close to that. And it was so
great to hear that from a creative storytelling partner, because I was like, it's going in the script. We're going to write that up. So it's great. The Clarice rights have always been tricky because they're owned by MGM, and the way the rights break down with the novels is that the character Martha has the rights to everybody in Red Dragon, and every character is originated in Red Dragon, so they track through all of the books, but she doesn't have the rights to whoever originated in Silence of the Lambs, so Buffalo Bill, Clarice, Barney, Ardella Map, those characters, which are all very fantastic, we don't have rights to, but we tried every year, we go back to them, and at first it was a hard no, and then it was like ask us later, and then it was ask us again next year. So because the show may be changing formats, it may not be possible, or if we, in the change of the formats, we're able to work out a deal where we can include those things, it would be fantastic. I love Ellen Page. I think she would be a great Clarice, but I also love the idea of casting somebody who's not white in that role, and having race play a factor in Clarice's background in a way that race plays a factor in everybody's background. So I think that would be an interesting exploration of the character. Thank you.
Thanks.